Welcome to the Personalities in the Workplace podcast. We're introducing you to an easy-to-understand conversation about personalities. Navigating the different personalities in your business can be tedious. We believe that once you understand what drives and stresses those you work with, you can better interact and steer others towards productivity and success. Today, we're focusing on the differences between feelers and thinkers, and we'll get back to that in just a moment. This episode is made available because of the generous sponsorship of Blackburn Consulting. Learn more about Blackburn Consulting at blackburnconsultingnc.com.
Greetings. This is Timogi, the Empowerment Specialist. Welcome to Personalities in the Workplace, where I'm interviewing the one, the only Chuck Taylor from Sage Garden Care Center. Woo! Chuck is in the house.
Yeah.
Okay, Chuck, You've laid out the foundation of what Myers-Briggs is as well as what it isn't. Mm-hmm. We discussed what the differences between an extrovert and an introvert was. Mm-hmm. We've discussed the difference between sensing and intuition. Mm-hmm. And now we go into thinking and feeling.
Right, the cataclysmic clash of emotions and non-emotions.
Yeah, because we live in a world now that what we feel overrides what we think sometimes. Yeah. And sometimes we need to, think a little more, and then sometimes we need to be a little bit more compassionate. So I need you to unpack this for me.
All right. So one of the critical elements of this that I think is foundationally important is we need to make sure that we don't make some blanketed assumptions about people. Those who have a preference for thinking, right? They stay on that T side, T and F, T for thinking, F for feeling. Those who have a preference for thinking have feelings and emotions, right? They're not robots.
Is that on a T-shirt somewhere? I think and have emotions.
Emotions, right. And those who are feelers actually can be quite logical and can be very rational in the way that they make decisions.
I feel what I think. Put that on a T-shirt.
So really what we're talking about is how a person makes their decisions. Okay? Do I make my decisions based on how I feel about something, or do I make my decisions based on what I think about something? And this is core to this conversation. And you can see where there's a drastic difference just in the words themselves, thinking versus feeling, head versus heart, and how we process this as to where people are going to get themselves in trouble.
Very interesting. So we started out that introvert versus extrovert was how we feel, about energy, Sensing versus intuition was more about a processing.
Taking in information.
And now we're talking about decision making.
Absolutely. Yes. So the person who is oriented towards thinking is going to make their decisions based on what is logical, what is the, quote, best course of action, what is the most reasonable thing to do. They love to be analytical and to really look at the situation for what it is and to make decisions without having to consider, not that they won't, but without having to consider how it's going to affect or impact other people.
Wow. There's a scene in a movie that comes to mind when this thinking versus feeling, I, Robot, with Will Smith.
Yeah.
And Will is a cop.
Okay.
And a robot saved him in a drowning accident over a child because the robot made a decision by calculating who had the best chance of surviving.
Yeah, right.
And so the robot said, based on, their scan of what was happening internally, he had the best chance of surviving. Yeah. So the robot saved him.
Right.
So I'm thinking about this whole thinking versus feeling and the world turning into a little bit more automation, Chuck. You have me contemplating some things here.
It can be scary, right?
Yeah, it can be. So talk to me again. Decision making, thinking versus feeling.
So we think about it even in the modern media world where we have news, and so we live in a world that runs with this dichotomy all the time. If someone commits a murder, we say, look, there should be justice and there should be discipline, there should be punishment for that. We don't like to leave murders unsolved. We want to take care of that. And that's the rational side of our mindset. However, there are cases where empathy for the circumstances and situations come into play, and so we become quite emotional. And if there was a situation where one person died and the other person didn't, then all of a sudden there can be this rife conversation of, hey, why didn't it happen this way? What should have been taken into account? We love to question things on the back end. In the moment, we want people to act very rationally, but afterwards, we think back on it and look at it with our emotions. And so we have to be very careful that we don't pigeonhole people into one area or another without allowing us to really look at the context of situations.
Okay. And so as we approach this concept of thinking and feeling, there's a balance, right? Somewhere in there for all of us.
Yep.
However, one tends to take the more prevalent side of our process. Huh?
Right. So we talked about preferences earlier. What do I prefer? Which way do I operate best? Where do I function at its most clear? And so this is where we're at. So if I'm a thinker, analytical, make logical choices. If I'm a feeler, I'm almost going to ask the question, how does this situation affect those around me? Right? What is the impact of this decision on other people? So feelers are almost by nature drawn to other people. They're people-oriented in their nature. So we see a lot of it. So when you take an extrovert, right, who does everything outside of their body and who is really drawn into the external world where they're engaging with people, and they have this feeling side, that EF kind of component, we find people who are very people-oriented, very engaged with people, very connected with them.
Okay, and so that thinking person who wants to deal with the analytical side of things, right?
Yep.
When you're in the workplace, right, and you bring something to your supervisor and say, I want to do this, your supervisor wants numbers, facts, and figures. Usually, right? So what do you tell that person who's a feeler who feels like this would be a good decision but may not have the facts and the figures and the data behind it?
So when I work with companies, because I do some consulting with companies, and I start talking to them about the way that these interact in these situations, I got a feeling-based person. So a logical person will come in, they're thinking side, and they'll say, hey, listen, here's a project that we want to run. We need 5 people to run this project, to do this, 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 and this. And invariably, the feeling-based person will come back at some point in time and say, okay, but how does this affect so-and-so? You know, Joe, he's been working here for 20 years, and he's been wanting to do a project like that. I bet he would enjoy being on that project. And the thinking person may say, but Joe doesn't have the skill set of these other 5 that we want to have here. And so the thinking person is going to say, wait a second, this isn't fair. So let me park on the fairness conversation, because I think this is a really good example of how the two different parts process information.
Okay.
Both thinkers and feelers believe in the inherent value of fairness. However, thinkers say fairness should be applied universally to everyone. Right? Fairness should be something that we do the same thing for everybody in the same way. We should treat everybody the same way in all circumstances as best we can, because that's what's fair for everybody. We don't show partiality in situations. Feelers, on the other hand, would say, but we need to take the context and the situation of the person into account when making a decision. So I don't want to be unfair to any one individual. I want to look at what's going on. So, you know, Martha hasn't shown up for work on time 3 days in a row, but her mom is super sick. She's dying of cancer, and we just really need to help her out and be patient with her as she gets through this struggle. And so the feeler would say, oh, we need to be patient with that. And the thinker would say, she didn't show up to work 3 times in a row on time. Look, we don't let anybody else offer that. Right? And so the thinker can be accused of being callous and uncaring when in fact they're just trying to apply fairness across the board. Right? And the feeler can be called overly sensitive, right? And too caring about others in a situation when they're really just trying to weigh in personal aspects of a person's life.
So what do you tell that feeler where that thinker says, this is the data, this is the numbers, and so this is what it says. I don't, how you feel is irrelevant because the data says this.
Yeah. It's correct. So first of all, I would say stop using the words, this is irrelevant.
Check.
So here's the struggle is both parties bring something of value. There are going to be times when the situation dictates that we lean more towards our logical side in making decisions. And there are going to be other times when the situation dictates that we lean more towards our feeling side. And in a corporate environment, you have to decide which one's best for the circumstances. You can't just take a person's situation and toss it out the door. I mean, how many times have you heard stories of people within companies that they want to make a decision, but then all of a sudden the media gets hold of the story and they go, oh, but it was this poor person. I feel like it's happened to airline companies more this year than anybody else, is airlines are trying to universally apply rules across the board to manage people because they're a social-based industry. And it comes back to bite them because the media finds out, oh, but there was this poor, sad story about this mom and her kid or this dad or, whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. And we go, that's unacceptable because we should have empathy for that situation. And the airline gets caught in the middle between what's a logical choice and what's the feeling choice. And which one do you choose? And you kind of have to go with what the situation dictates.
So that person who has to make that decision, who has a logical choice in front of them and a feeling choice in front of them, the decision is going to be based on their personality, more than likely.
In many ways. And sometimes it's going to come down to which one's going to cost us more money, right? Is not fixing this going to cost us more money than fixing it is going to? And so that's where that logic may come back into play. Sometimes it's a guessing game, but ultimately we have to decide, okay, what's public interest? What are people paying attention to? And look, society is fickle. We pay attention for a story until another good story comes along. So sometimes companies just wisely wait it out until the story goes away and it's not that big of an issue anymore. So we're going to pause right here for just a moment, and we're going to thank our sponsor, Audrey Blackburn of Blackburn Consulting. She's a firm believer in what it takes to make businesses profitable. One of the things that I know is that every business has tools that you use to do your job well. Plumbers have wrenches and plumber's tape, and carpenters have hammers, etc. And when you're running your business, one of the most important tools that you can use is something to manage your money. A lot of people use a tool like QuickBooks, but if you've used QuickBooks, you know that this is not an easy tool for the person who doesn't understand accounting or bookkeeping. Audrey Blackburn, she has a firm understanding of it. And here's what I also know. You're good at your business. You're good at making money for your business. And when you're sitting down running the finances in the background, you're not making money for your business. Transfer that to someone who knows what they're doing and can help you get out there making money not only for you, for your family, for those you care about. Go grow your business. Contact Audrey Blackburn of Blackburn Consulting today. BlackburnConsultingNC.com. All right, let's get back to our show.
Okay. And so when that thinker has these variables in front of them and they're saying, I've crunched the numbers, and if we do this, we'll make X amount of profit. Mm-hmm. And that might include letting the 20-year-old person, giving them an early retirement, What do we do? Do we think about the longevity of the company? Or do we worry about the fact that, Joe Smith's been working here for 25 years and that's all he knows?
So, Timogi, I feel like you need to be validated in this situation.
Yeah,
you've had experiences where you've tried to be logical and somebody else's feelings have won out. Yeah, right. The situation is, like you're talking about, you bring this up and we bring raw data and numbers. And we need to appreciate the fact that these logical people are bringing real, tangible information that's worth looking at. But if you look at numbers without looking at how those numbers affect the people, you still don't win. If you look at a situation and you only measure it on people and you don't look at the numbers and how that affects the situation, you still don't win, right? So when we start talking about personalities, my commitment is Let's bring both sides to the table and say, what's the best course situation that we need to think about? Sometimes letting Joe go is the best decision. But I'll give you an example. 10 years ago, companies were laying off these boomers left and right because it was costing them too much money. They were paying the same amount of money for one person that they could hire 2 Gen Xers or 2 millennials to do the same job. And then they came back and found later on, wait a second, that those people who are younger don't have the experience, don't have the skill set, maybe the motivation or the drive to be able to do the job as well as those who are boomers. So now there's a big drive to hire boomers back, even though they cost more. Why? Because I know they're going to do the job well, they're reliable, et cetera, and frankly, sometimes we want to help them out because they're in the latter stages of their career lives.
Wow. And so when you, again, are there certain industries, and I think I've asked you this on the other types, are there certain industries where thinkers and feelers thrive?
Yeah, right. So when I think feelers, my heart automatically goes toward teachers and nurses, right? So these are individuals who work in some sort of caring, sharing, empathy, service to people sort of fields. Nonprofits, I think, draw a lot of feelers into their work and into their world. When I think business leaders and accountants, or I think of potentially doctors, politicians, that kind of thing, these are going to be thinker type people. And thinkers often have a thicker skin, right? They don't get bothered by things nearly as much as the feeler side might. But empathy is huge for that personal human relationship, that human capital that we build.
Wow. And so to find that balance, Chuck, between thinking and feeling and which one takes precedence, I guess it just comes down to that leader being able to not just look at, I guess, the people side of their business, but they also have to look at the profit, because the profit affects the people.
Right. Yeah, and so what I say is, one, you need to know who you are as an individual. Which way do you lean? And then ask yourself, what is it that I'm missing? What am I overlooking? Let me bring somebody in from the other side of the situation. In my world, my wife does some work with me. I'm a feelings-based person, and so there's a ton of times that I go make decisions, and I start to talk it out with her, and I go, but what's this person going to think? And she'll say, why do you care what that person thinks? And I'll say, well, I don't know. I like them. They did some nice stuff for me, and so I feel this social responsibility to help out individuals maybe that aren't deeply connected. And she brings me back to reality to say, look, that person is not doing enough for you to make a decision for you to really invest a ton of time, effort, energy, and potentially money into what it is that you're worrying about. So you got to have that balance, seeing what's good and what's beneficial for your situation.
Well, see, that's very interesting. I actually posted a memory on my social media page that said, you cannot care about what other people think of you and be sane. So that tells you a lot about my personality type, right?
Yeah, you might be a bit different than I am.
Just a tad, Chuck, a tad. And so balancing your feelings with the logic. I mean, that's a seesaw that, you kind of have to get that one right.
Well, and we have to be careful about how we label people. So thinkers will come back and they'll say, you care too much about what people think about you. When the reality is, a feeler may say, no, that's not the issue. It's not that I care about what people think of me. This is not an insecurity issue. This is, what is personal responsibility in a social setting? What responsibility do I have to care for the people around me? That's where a feeler lives. That's what they think about. On the other hand, this is in part how we're processing the information that comes to us. So feelers are going to process information based on their feelings. They're going to be more in tap to their feelings, whereas thinkers are going to be less in tune to what their feelings are because they're processing analytically.
Now, Mama told me.
Mama told you. Listen, what did Mama say?
Mama told me
Mama's
that your
always
feelings will get you in trouble sometimes, Chuck. There's so many old phrases and adages about feelings. So I need you to unpack that for me, Chuck. My feelings sometimes are wrong. And so I'm a thinker as I say this. So yes. I'm biased, listeners. I'm very biased. But sometimes what you feel, everything that looks good or may feel good may not be good for you. Chuck, I'm throwing that over there and I'm not coming back to get it.
Look, feelings are what connect us to other people. And my background, my history was in pastoring, and so one of the greatest verses is, "There's nothing more deceitful than the human heart. Who can know its ways?" And I think this is true. I think there's a reality is that feelings can oftentimes get us in trouble. But that's when feelings rule our decision making. And I think that's what we're talking about here. You can get too one-sided where you focus so much on one area. If you're too logical, you miss out on connecting to other people and drawing them into being engaged. So a thinker might come in and go, all right, I've looked at all the numbers. Here's a process. Here's what we're going to do. And somebody's going to say, well, we can't do that because, Joe, he's got this problem. He's got the issue. He can't. Well, it doesn't really matter about Joe now, does it? Because here's what we need to do. We already talked about it. Boom, let's do it. The difficulty is now you're not going to have motivation. You're not going to have morale. You're not going to have engagement because people don't feel like you care. Right? And so in the workplace, one of the things we know is that people gravitate to folks who care about them. Mm-hmm. And so having these feelings that connect us, give me the person who gives me the data, who gives me the raw numbers, who's acting logically, and marry that individual with someone who is able to connect to feelings, and now have a powerhouse, right? Someone who can engage people to work on a logical solution.
So it's very important here not to equate feelings with emotions.
Absolutely.
It's for us to understand that feeling is way deeper in this context than just your emotional reaction in the moment.
One of the things that I tell leaders, managers, and businesses and otherwise to do is as you're helping people work out what it is they want, right? So they're thinking, whether they're an introvert or they're an extrovert, they're trying to think things out, is because thinkers operate in their head so much, they don't know how they feel about certain circumstances. And words matter. So what's interesting is if I walk up to a person who is a thinker and I say to them, hey, tell me how you feel about that project we put together. They may look at me with all sincerity and say, I don't know, because they don't care how they think about it, how they feel about it. It doesn't matter, right? They don't process with their feelings. But if I say, what do you think about that project? Now all of a sudden they can tap into that part of their brain and go, well, here's what I think about it, and boom, 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 boom. Now, the funny part about this is the opposite isn't inherently true. If I go up to a feeler person and I say, what do you think about that? They'll tell me stuff. It just probably won't make any sense at all, right? Okay, because they've got something to say. But if I say, how do you feel about this? Now I've tapped into the part of them that really allows them to process information the way they do it well. And now they're going to share with me what they really feel about that circumstance.
Wow. Well, I once worked for an institution, and one of the things that they would, we had to take an employee cut of 10%.
Oh, wow. Yeah, 10. Wow.
10% company-wide.
Yep.
Now, thinkers, right? Thinkers still didn't feel good, Chuck.
Yeah, sure.
About taking that 10% cut,
even
though the numbers were run and we could see the benefit. So, I mean, really, this for me so far in the three areas, coming from sensing and intuition, coming from being an introvert and an extrovert, thinking and feeling for me is kind of like the grayest place thus far.
Okay.
Thus far, because there has to be a balance. And because I know I'm a thinker, I want to gravitate toward, but this is what the numbers say.
Yeah, right.
Chuck, and who can argue the facts?
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
Yeah, and that would be so easy. That would be so easy if we dealt with robots and all we had was facts and figures to deal with, and everybody went, yes, that is the facts. I tell you what, we probably shouldn't take a 10% cut. If we want to live better, we probably ought to take a 20% cut. And this will, because 80% is better than no percent, and this will help the business, right? But the reality is that if we want people to stay engaged, we want people to stay, as long as you're working with humans, that feeling component is gonna be there, right? We still got to bring that into the conversation. And even the most logical person in the world still has some feelings that they attach to situations, circumstances, or others, and we don't want to dismiss that.
Obviously we don't, because there is no do not like button on Facebook.
That's right.
There is only a like button, right?
That's right.
So they don't want to know if you don't like.
And I got, hey, listen, I got 482 likes on that post. So empirically, I'm amazing.
Right. That's 482 to 0 because there's no dislike button right next to it for us to compare this data and say, yes, 482 people liked it, but how many people disliked it?
That's it.
Because if I have 5,000 Facebook friends and only 482 liked it, does by default...
Then I suck as a human being. That's what it means. I'm a horrible person with horrible friends.
Well, Chuck, I think this is a good segue to get into that next component of judgment versus perception.
Right, and this is the most misunderstood one. We're going to get into this in more detail in the next one. But what does it mean to be a judger? What does it mean to be a perceiver? What does it mean for this fourth category that was added on later? But it really defines so much of how we do personality types.
Well, we're going to find out on our next podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in.
Good to be here again. Thank you for listening to episode 4 of the Personalities in the Workplace podcast, sponsored by Blackburn Consulting. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to Blackburn Consulting, links to the Personality in the Workplace personality cards that we mentioned, more information on Timogi Jackson and me, Chuck Taylor of Sage Garden Care Center, a link to take your own personality assessment online, and much more. Each episode, we're bringing you practical, tangible, and engaging conversations that will help you gain perspective on the people you work with. Join us for the next episode where we will discuss the differences between judgers and perceivers in the workplace. Is there something more you would like to learn about regarding personalities? Send us an email at chuck@personalitiesintheworkplace.com. Thanks, and we'll see you in the next podcast.